President Trump is slamming the governors of Michigan and Nevada over attempts to expand mail-in voting access. Both states are ramping up absentee ballot applications in response to the pandemic. Earlier in the day, the president threatened to cut federal funding to both states. During a meeting with the governors of Arkansas and Kansas at the White House Wednesday, Mr. Trump doubled down on his threats. He also alleged that mail-in ballots are subject to massive fraud. The president then praised the director of the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, Dr. Robert Redfield. Mr. Trump denied privately criticizing the agency. The president's comments about the CDC come as we're learning more about guidelines the agency released over the weekend. They are meant to help states slow the spread of COVID-19 and include advice on preventing the virus from spreading in places like schools, mass transit, and offices. All 50 states have now started easing stay-at-home guidelines, but only 2 of them, North Dakota and Kentucky, have met the federal criteria for entering phase 1 of reopening. Anita Kumar joins me now. She's a White House correspondent and associate editor for Politico. Good to see you again, Anita. The White House has opposed overly detailed guidelines, hoping states will reopen as quickly as possible. However, a number of states that are reopening are also seeing a spike in coronavirus cases. What does that mean for the president's messaging on restarting the economy?
Well, there are a lot of people, obviously state officials and the president, who hope they don't need to close again. That has always been the risk, is that if there was a spike and it became dangerous, that the states and the localities would have to close again. But there's, a couple things going on here. Every state has been different, and local and state officials were hoping for some guidelines, for some ideas on how they should do this safely. And these guidelines that have just come out are coming a little bit late because, as you indicated, all the states are now beginning to open or talking about it and getting there. So they're going to be all doing their own different thing, and they're all going to see different infection rates and have to make that determination on what to do in the future.
So President Trump is set to visit a Ford plant in Michigan Thursday, and the plant requires everyone to wear a mask. The president was asked if he would wear one, and he said it would depend on the situation. What message, Anita, does the president send when he holds an event at the White House or travels and does not wear a mask?
Well, we haven't seen the president wear a mask, as you indicated, both in traveling and at the White House. The White House rules in the last week or so are that everybody, particularly those in public places where they're, walking around with other people and in meetings, need to wear masks. We still have yet to see the president do that. The White House says that his doctor and his aides will determine what he'll do. We have seen the vice president now starting to wear a mask, but there are a lot of people around the country and also, in Washington, who say that you need to show your elected leaders, the people right at the top that are behaving in a certain way, wearing masks and also social distancing and other things, that you should lead by example. The president should be showing that, the vice president and other leaders should be showing that, so that others will take it seriously. So there are people that are very critical of the president for not doing that.
Multiple senior officials from the Trump campaign confirmed to CBS News there's an initiative in the works to have pro-Trump doctors publicly supporting the president and his views on the pandemic response. Anita, what does that suggest about the campaign's strategy?
Well, in one respect, it's not surprising. They had all these things at the Trump campaign that they had planned on campaigning about, and all of those have really been washed away by the pandemic. The president has gotten a lot of criticism for his response, for not, having supplies and tests get to the states, for downplaying it a couple months ago. And so they really have felt like at the campaign that they needed to sort of rewrite the narrative on that and, go out there and be very aggressive about what his response was like. So in that respect, it's not surprising that they would want doctors that are pro-Trump, as you said, doctors that would support the president being out there. If you ask the campaign, I think they said to you all, that to CBS, that, look, we have people that are supporting the president all the time come forward. It is a little bit interesting, though, and you've had some people sort of raise their eyebrows about this because it's the pandemic, it's a health crisis, and it's not, a campaign issue. But really, we're 6 months from the election. Pretty much everything is a campaign issue now.
Yeah, I think that's pretty fair to say. Well, on a call with Hispanic community leaders and supporters Wednesday, the president accused Democrats of wanting to keep people in their homes, saying, quote, they want to keep them shut down, locked up. The president and his children have suggested Democratic governors are to blame for temporarily stopping his campaign rallies despite bipartisan restrictions banning large events. Anita, how does that play into the president's broader re-election campaign?
Well, the president has been saying for weeks now, as you know, that the country needs to open up. And there were a lot of a lot of Republicans on Capitol Hill, but also around the country in legislatures and just activists who were sort of pushing him to do that the economy needs to open up. And that is, one of the most important things for him and his election and Republicans in general. But it's not all Democrats that are saying things should be closed. He hosted the governor of Colorado at the White House just last week, and that governor is opening up. He was pushed out there as a model of here's what Colorado is doing to open up, and here's how they're doing it safely. So he's sort of putting partisan politics on this when actually, as you indicated, all 50 states are starting to open up. But the president really wants to make this about us against them. The Democrats are preventing us from holding rallies, from going out, from going back to work, going in restaurants. And that's something we're going to see him continue to talk about for the next several months. But he is very frustrated about his rallies. It's something he really wants to get back to. And obviously, with the number of people that show up, tens of thousands, he's just not been able to do that.
So on the topic of rallies, your colleague Gabby Orr recently wrote about how the Trump campaign is working to find a way to restart the president's signature rallies. How realistic is that? And what do Republicans want the president to focus on should his rallies resume?
Well, Republicans really are talking about wanting his message to be, obviously, he's got to talk about how he's handled the pandemic, but they want him to talk a lot about the economy and how he's going to get that moving again. It was 3.5 years ago, 4 years ago when he was running the first time where he said he wanted to make America great again, really, change the economy, restore it, rebuild it. And not just the economy, but he talked about immigration. He talked about a variety of other things. And they really want him to start talking about some of those other things again, things that he's accomplished, things that he had wanted to talk about before the pandemic. And so they're eager for him to do that. Now, whether the rallies can happen is a little bit unclear. You see the president talking to his aides, as my colleague reported, that he really wants them to figure out the way to do this. And so they're talking about sort of, should they have events where people can drive in instead of, packing, an arena and that sort of thing. But they have talked about what are the ways that the president himself can get back out there and campaign, because he really hasn't done that. Another thing that she reported in that story was also perhaps the president himself will do some of these virtual events. It's clearly not the same thing, but Joe Biden is doing them. Other candidates that are running this November for other races have to do that same thing. So there's talk about at least starting him to do some of those online events.
Well, I also want to ask you about the president's tweets threatening to cut funding to Nevada and Michigan over expanded mail-in voting. But a federal judge in Texas said that all residents can apply to vote by mail during the pandemic. And RNC chairwoman Ronna McDaniel said she would support plans to mail absentee ballot applications to voters. So, Anita, what is the real issue here?
Well, it was sort of confusing. And as you probably saw earlier at the White House today, the White House officials were not really able to explain what was going on. The president has said since he's been in office that he finds that there is often voter fraud, but he's never really explained it. He has mentioned many times that mail-in ballots lead to fraud. But again, he hasn't really explained that. As many people have pointed out, he actually does vote by absentee ballot. His residence now is Florida. And of course, he's in Washington, so he votes by mail as well. But he thinks, he has said over and over that he feels that there would be fraud if people go this route. But what we're seeing across the country is a lot of Democrats, but Republicans too, pushing for mail-in ballots because we don't know what things are going to be like in a few months. In November, are people going to be able to go out en masse and vote? It's really unclear. So you've seen a lot of Democrats, but also Republicans start to push for that.
All right, Anita Kumar for us. Anita, thank you very much.
Sure. Thank you.